We are not. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We are getting started. My name is Sarah Urquhart, and along with my husband, who's here with me, that's him. You'll be seeing him a little later in the meeting. His name is Steve Urquhart. We're co-founders of the Divine Assembly, and the Divine Assembly is hosting this event tonight, and we are very excited to welcome you all and have you all here. We are also in the room joined by Rick and Aubrey Langer, and we'll be hearing from Rick in just a minute, and we'll learn more about him. Also in the room, we have Don Walton with us. So if you see faces on screen, those are all the people that are in attendance. Let me tell you quickly a little more about the Divine Assembly. We started our group 2.5 years ago, and we're about 5,000 strong with active groups in a handful of states. We're a church with psychedelic mushrooms as our sacrament, and we are currently acquiring land outside of Salt Lake City where we want to build a healing and worship center. You can find out details about who we are. Yep, we are. Thank you. You can find out details about who we are and what we stand for, and more about this current project at thedivineassembly.org. You have to put a "the" on it, thedivineassembly.org. Let me tell you what we're going to do tonight so you know what to expect. First of all, I'm going to introduce Rick. And he's the man who made tonight happen. And we're really excited to have him as part of our group, and that he's willing to share his talents and his connections and his friends with us. Then Rick is going to introduce Professor Roland Griffiths. Professor Griffiths will talk to us. And then we're going to watch a short video about Professor Griffiths. And after the video, we'll do the question and answer part of the night. Now, all of the questions have been submitted. We had people do that over the last few weeks. So even though the question and answer box is open, that's not where we'll be pulling questions from. We have the questions already in hand. So we just want you to know that. So with that, I'm going to introduce Rick, and then he'll take over and take us into the next part of the night. Rick Langer is a retired aeronautical engineer, an IBM computer analyst, and a lawyer. He currently lives in South Jordan, Utah with his wife, Audrey, where he is an active husband, father, grandfather, photographer, Buddhist mentor, and psychedelic seeker. Since 2010, when he first experienced psilocybin, he has worked to make psychedelics ultimately available to persons suffering from mental disorders and for the betterment of well people, all within the proper setting. He has been greatly privileged to know Professor Griffiths for over 10 years and has been especially honored to work with him this year in establishing the new and exciting Roland R. Griffiths PhD Professorship Fund at Johns Hopkins University, the purpose of which is to create a world-class, scientifically rigorous psychedelic research program to advance the well-being of all humans for generations to come. So a special welcome to Rick, and we're so excited to have him here, and we'll have him take it.
Good evening. Fantastic.
Thank you. We'll get there.
Yeah, we're just working through technical problems. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. And just give a brief introduction to Roland Griffiths. a preface to that a little bit. Psychedelics have actually been in use for a very, very long time. I looked up to see if I could get some idea of how long they've been around, and at least in terms of human evidence of use of psychedelics, it dates back to 7,000 years ago in a cave in the Sahara Desert. But the development and use of psychedelics has often been characterized by suppression. Suppression driven by fear that these substances could disrupt an existing social order. We saw that certainly when the Spanish invaded Central America and suppressed the Native American use of psychedelics. And we saw it again more recently in my own lifetime, and I suspect the lifetime of others of you, in 1970, when the Nixon administration started a war on drugs, classifying cannabis and psychedelics as illegal Schedule I drugs, which meant they had no recognized medicinal value and a high potential for abuse. Well, that action left research completely dark for almost 30 years. And in 2000, Dr. Roland Griffiths, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University and a long-term meditator, courageously sought to open the door on psychedelics again, and was the first to achieve US regulatory approval to study psychedelics in healthy volunteers. Now, Dr. Griffiths was not just any researcher. He was regarded as an investigator beyond reproach, a scientist of the first order, a scientist who carried lots of credibility. And his research led to a landmark scientific paper in 2006 entitled "Psilocybin Can Occasion Mystical Type Experiences, Having Substantial and Sustained Personal Meaning and Spiritual Significance." This paper is online, and I'd encourage any of you interested in the topic to read it, because it is the paper that ignited the spark that has created the psychedelic renaissance that we're experiencing in the world today. Since 2006, Dr. Griffiths has continued his research on both the therapeutic uses of psychedelics and the use of psychedelics in mystical type experiences. In 2019, 3 years ago, he and his team, through the help of private donors, established the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research at Johns Hopkins Medicine, the first of its kind in the United States. And in addition, in this year, 2022, Dr. Griffiths established at Johns Hopkins the Roland R. Griffiths PhD Professorship Fund, which is designed to be a world-class, scientifically rigorous psychedelic research program to advance spirituality and well-being in the service of human flourishing for generations to come. I cannot imagine anyone more qualified to talk with us tonight about psychedelics and spirituality. And it is with great respect and humility that I introduce you to Dr. Roland Griffiths.
Thank you, Rick. I am unable to start my video. It says the host has stopped it. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me? Oh, there we go. Thank you. And do I have the ability to share my screen? I do. Thank you. Are you able to see the screen? I'm not hearing any audio.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you, Rick, for those lovely comments and Sarah. So what I was asked to do is talk about psychedelics and spirituality, which is, well, frankly, my deepest interest with psychedelics. And as Rick indicated, I started a meditation practice, and that was about 25 years ago. And it was through that practice that I actually became interested in psychedelics. Some experiences that I had in meditation and curiosity. And in that respect, I'm different from many people who get interested in meditation after having exposure to psychedelics. But I came in not having any significant experience with psychedelics, but very interested because I was trained as a psychopharmacologist and had done a lot of work with different drugs, very interested in exploring that as a possibility. So this is just my obligatory acknowledgments and disclosures. I'm required to do this through my institution. And just to say that this work that I'll present has been supported by various sources, fundamentally by philanthropic sources, but as well as the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And the research has been conducted at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And as Rick mentioned, in 2019, we established the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, which is comprised now of 7 core faculty members, 5 postdoctoral fellows, several affiliate faculty investigators, and more than 20 additional staff. So this is a real team effort in a very exciting field. Let me just start off with some basics. So in terms of background, psilocybin is considered a classic psychedelic, and these compounds that are structurally diverse group, but they all bind serotonin 2A receptors and produce their effects downstream from that. What really establishes them as unique is they produce this profile, unusual profile, in changes in thoughts, perceptions, and emotions that are often experienced as deeply meaningful. So examples of the classic psychedelics are, of course, psilocybin, and then DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which can be taken by itself or in the form of ayahuasca, and also then the phenethylamines, primarily mescaline, and then some human synthesized compounds. As Rick mentioned, use of the naturally occurring compounds like psilocybin in mushrooms and perhaps mescaline and DMT date back hundreds and possibly thousands of years. And psilocybin is, of course, the principal psychoactive component of the psilocybe genus of mushrooms. And psilocybin in particular has been used for, again, hundreds, possibly thousands of years within some cultures for healing, divination, spiritual and religious purposes. And I would highly recommend this very recently published book along this line of psychedelics and the connection to religion. This is published, authored by Brian Murescu. It's a recent New York bestseller, New York Times bestseller. And he argues, based on very extensive historical research, that psychedelic drugs may be the original sacraments for Western civilization. Before I launch into the studies, I want to just underscore abuse and risks of psilocybin. So psilocybin, of course, is classified as a Schedule I compound under our Controlled Substances Act, and therefore there's no going that may result in several years of approval for medical use. And that makes them illegal to use under federal law, and they remain illegal to use under federal law, even in states or regions that have decriminalized or legalized them. Lifetime prevalence of non-medical use of classic psychedelics is about 14%, and it's trending upwards in recent years, not surprisingly, because of all the cultural attention that's being given to them. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, that's NIDA, doesn't consider psilocybin and other classic psychedelics to be drugs of addiction per se, because they don't produce compulsive drug-taking behavior. And medical emergencies from psilocybin use is very rare, as reflected in emergency room reports. But I think the point I really want to underscore is, despite the low risk of addiction and toxicity, there's real concern, and there should be concern, about exposure to psilocybin and other psychedelics because of the potential adverse effects they can produce. And these include panic reactions, engaging in dangerous behavior, and then possible precipitation of enduring psychiatric conditions, probably in vulnerable people who have some kind of biological vulnerability or some personality trait vulnerability. We ran a survey to kind of probe the risks and published in 2016. And it was of almost 2,000 individuals who reported having had a challenging experience after taking psilocybin. And as you can see here, 11% of these people put themselves or others at risk of physical harm. 3% sought medical help. And I think most disconcerting to me, 10% reported enduring adverse psychological symptoms lasting greater than a year. Now, these are people who took psilocybin. They may have taken it multiple times, so these percentages are reflecting their worst experience with psilocybin. So it doesn't indicate what percentage of new users will have these experiences. But the point I'd like to make is there's a real signal for adverse effects here. And the other important point is that such effects are very uncommon in our laboratory studies, where we carefully screen individuals, we prepare them before, we sit with them during, and support them after their sessions. So the risk can be mitigated with careful screening and in the context of appropriate set and setting. So we have conducted at Hopkins, since we initiated this work in 1999, a series of studies. We've treated 440 participants to date and we've had over 800 psilocybin sessions. So we've garnered a good bit of experience with them. And we've done a series of studies, and the ones that I'm going to focus on are in healthy volunteers, and I'm going to talk about those. And we've also, because of my interest in meditation, studied psilocybin in novice and long-term meditators. We've just recently completed a study in religious professionals, that is clergy. But as well, and because the cultural zeitgeist and the economics point us in the direction of treatment, we've done a lot of research and are continuing research on treatment of patients for various conditions. And that's all looking very promising, but it's not going to be the focus of my comments today. Instead, I'm going to talk about studies in healthy participants, and again, focusing on spirituality and altruism and the attendant pro-social behaviors that emerge from such experiences. So here I'm going to just summarize several of our studies in healthy volunteers, and give you a sense of how we conduct these sessions and the basic features that emerge. And in our studies, these features that emerge and how we conduct the studies are very similar to our therapeutic studies. So these are double-blind crossover designs. We recruit volunteers from the local community through flyers and newspaper advertising. Participants have been medically and psychologically healthy, and most were without histories of any psychedelic use. Now, in our setup, once someone is screened in, they meet with our session monitors, sometimes called guides or sitters, on several occasions before the first session, and then after each session. And our sessions are 8 hours in duration. They're conducted in a living room-like environment designed for the study. People show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and they take a capsule. They're encouraged to lay on a couch with eye shades and headphones through which they listen to music. They're in the presence of 2 guides or monitors who are there to support them in the event that significant fear or anxiety arises. But overall, it's our intention to create a container for people to have their own experience, and we encourage them to direct their attention inward on their inner experience throughout the session. And this just shows the time course of effects. This is kind of the magnitude of effects as judged by the observers, the monitors. And this is a dose effect study. So you see different doses of psilocybin over time, which starts at the time the capsule is taken and goes out to 6 hours later. And you can see that there's very orderly dose and time-dependent effects. You can see that effects are coming on at about 30 minutes. If the fill symbols indicate they're significant from placebo. And the effects peak at about 3 hours and then decrease over the afternoon. And by the time we let people go, they're back to pretty much their normal state. So what happens? Well, not surprisingly, psilocybin under these conditions increases measures previously shown to be sensitive to psychedelic drugs. So there are perceptual changes like visual illusions, greater emotionality, increased sense of joy, peacefulness, and less frequently, but it does occur, significant fear or anxiety. There are also cognitive changes. So could be a sense of meaning that changes. Sometimes suspiciousness or paranoia may come up. Study that we ran and then has been replicated across studies is that in most participants, psilocybin produced large increases on self-rated questionnaires that have been designed to measure naturally occurring mystical or insightful type experiences. And this shows post-session ratings, that is, at the end of the session before the volunteer leaves, on a questionnaire that we have designed called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire. And the first thing I just want to point out, this is a dose effect study, and you have reliable and dose-dependent increases in mystical experience. But it would be right for you to ask about mystical. What in the world is that? And I think the point I want to make here is that it's defined, mystical experience is defined by a participant's endorsing a series of empirically measured phenomenological dimensions. That is, there are items on this questionnaire, and they either indicate that is relevant and the degree to which it's relevant or not. The point here is the measure need not imply, and in this case does not imply, supernatural or non-rational levels of explanation. So we're very grounded in empirical science. And if you think about it, it shouldn't be surprising that these kinds of experiences exist because they've been reported over the eons, and they're variously described as rapid conversion experiences, mystical, religious, peak experiences, transcendental experiences, transforming moment or epiphanies. And most often in the history of humankind, these occur naturally. But in this case, they also occur with psilocybin. So I want to just point out some of the features that the mystical experiences is tapping into. So these are gives you an indication of what kinds of questions people are answering to score high on the mystical experience questionnaire. And so there's that first factor is we call the mystical factor. And there's a sense of unity. It's a core feature of this experience. It's a sense of the interconnectedness of all people and things. It can be experienced that all is one. It could be experienced as a pure void of nothingness but fullness. It could be experienced as a sense of pure consciousness. And that's accompanied by this sense of sacredness or reverence. And if you want to put it in secular terms, preciousness, precious beyond belief. There's something that you want to hold close to your heart about this experience. And then the third feature, which is very important, is the sense that you've encountered ultimate reality, that this experience is more real and more true than everyday waking experience. And if you just think about those three pieces there, this sense that we're all interconnected, it's precious and it's true, you really can see the seeds of how these experiences may change people enduringly. And that's exactly what happens. There are these other features of the experience, positive mood, transcendence of time and space, and ineffability. So very often, when I walk into the session room at the end of the session and ask people what their experience was like, they'll say, you know, I can't put it into words. And I think, okay, that's one of the qualities of these experiences. Okay, so what I've described up to this point is what happens on the session day. But here's what's interesting about psychedelics and pulls them apart from every other drug class that I know of. And that is these effects endure. So here's 1 month after high dose sessions where we're having about 80% of participants saying that experience a month ago was among the top most spiritually significant and personally meaningful experiences of their entire lifetimes. And about 90% are reporting increased sense of well-being, life satisfaction, or positive behavior change. Germane to the topic at hand, 1 month after sessions, there are also dose-related increases in spirituality, in altruism, and positive social effects. And I want to give you an example of the types of things that people are endorsing. This is 1 month after sessions again. This is a spirituality scale showing the dose effects. And people are endorsing an increased sense of reverence, sacredness in daily life, gratitude for life, interconnectedness of life, increased prayer or meditation practice, increased sense of a personal relationship with the God of their understanding or of ultimate reality, and a decreased apprehension about death. In terms of altruism and positive social effects, people are reporting increased sensitivity to others, tolerance, love for others, social concern, compassion, concern for vulnerable populations, need for service to others, and decreases in hatred and negative expressions of anger. So that's out to 1 month. Here's these effects are sustained well after that. This is 14 month, and this is just illustrative of increases in endorsement of personal well-being and life satisfaction. And the red bar shows that increase in the percentage of people that are endorsing that fairly highly. And then the blue bar shows at 14 months. So these effects are sustained. So a haunting question initially for us was, well, is this just, are these people being delusional? You know, how much do these changes that they're reporting play over into their lives? And what we did and have done now in 5 or 6 studies is also asked friends, family members, colleagues at work, questions about the volunteer and how they may have changed. And what we've shown is that across all these studies, that we're getting increases. This is a month and 14 months. So essentially the community observers are reporting back along the same dimensions of change that the volunteer is reporting. And I'll show this slide to make the point that the mystical experience at the end of the session, however they rate that experience, that predicts positive outcomes and spiritual significant ratings at 14 months. So on the left here, what we're seeing is on the vertical axis, rating of spiritual significance at 1 year or 14 months. And on the horizontal axis, the mysticism score immediately after taking psilocybin or at the end of that day. And so you can see there's a strong positive correlation. So that says that mystical experience score at the end of the day is predictive of enduring positive effects. And the right-hand side of this shows that there's no relationship with intensity of psilocybin effect per se. So it has something to do in benefiting people with these kind of these qualities that are reflected in the mystical experience questionnaire. And I won't show you data, but across a range of therapeutic studies, we show the same thing, that the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin track the mystical type experience. Okay, now I want to move into some studies, the first two of which actually has to do with psilocybin and meditation. And I've come to believe that psilocybin and meditation can be viewed as complementary techniques for the exploration of the nature of mind and self. And I won't be talking in any detail about the basic neuropharmacology of psilocybin, and nor will I be talking about psychological mechanisms, just for lack of time. But I would like to point out that neuroimaging studies have shown that meditation and psilocybin produce rather similar decreases in brain circuits responsible for self-referential processing. And that's that ego dissolution. So what about these complementary approaches? So I'd just like to point out that psilocybin is a pharmacological tool that helps people recognize how it feels to embody the present moment, right? And that's exactly what meditation does, particularly Vipassana meditation. And I'm now just going to run through these qualities, and my claim is that they're equally true of psilocybin and meditation. So one learns in meditation and with psilocybin to dispassionately observe and let go of pain, fear, or discomfort. It can transform a conventional sense of self, this kind of egoically bounded self, to something other than that. A big wake-up call is you are not your mind. You are not purely identified with, or you shouldn't be identified with, that voice in your head. Both psilocybin and meditation make it possible to recognize that mind is capable of revealing knowledge, insights, or forgotten memories that aren't readily accessible in everyday waking consciousness. And there's also this sense of gaining an authoritative sense of the interconnectedness of all people and things. So this first study we ran and published in 2018 was in novice meditators. This was a double-blind study examining whether psilocybin experiences can facilitate people's engagement with meditation and other spiritual awareness practices, thus increasing spirituality and altruistic values and behaviors. So I'm going to run through the methods very quickly. It's 75 participants, little or no experience with meditation or psilocybin. the first 6 months, they had a 1 month, the study lasted 6 months. They had a 1 month meditation introduction followed by 2 psilocybin sessions. And people were randomized to one of 3 conditions. And there was this group 1, very low dose of psilocybin, and they received fairly little support for their spiritual practices, 6 sessions total. The group 2 is a high dose of psilocybin, and then again, low spiritual support. And the group 3 gave them both high dose of psilocybin and high spiritual support. So 26 encounters, either in groups or individuals, to support their spiritual practices. And here's the results. This is a spirituality measure, but it's going to be true of all the measures I show you. So you can see the low dose standard support, red, is lowest in terms of change in spirituality at 6 months. High dose standard support is intermediate, significantly higher than the low dose. So that's the effect of psilocybin. And when you add support, you get even a further increase. And so that's a measure of spirituality. Here's a measure of altruism or positive social effects. These are trait level changes, incidentally, which are very difficult to show. Forgiveness, this is benevolence motivation, again, showing the same effects. Interpersonal closeness, how close you feel to people. Daily spiritual experiences, that's how frequently you're aware of having spiritual experiences, again, increased in the same fashion. So the basic conclusion here is that psilocybin dose was a major determinant of these effects. That is, that red bar was reliably significantly different from the second bar. High support for spiritual practices, however, further increases the positive effects of high dose psilocybin. And a statistical analysis that we ran shows that psilocybin practices like meditation and mystical experience from psilocybin make independent contributions to positive outcomes, but mystical experiences, that is psilocybin, making substantially greater contributions. So I'm now going to turn to a study of psilocybin in long-term meditators. Again, this is a randomized placebo-controlled design comparing placebo with a moderately high dose of psilocybin. 40 participants, all of whom had substantial meditation experience, almost 6,000 meditation hours, lifetime, 17 meditation retreats on average, but no or very little past use of psychedelics. And during sessions, participants engaged in several periods of meditation. And just going right to the results here, this is scores on the mystical experience questionnaire, and not surprisingly, based on our studies in healthy volunteers, you can see that placebo, the red, is much higher. Psilocybin, the red, is much higher than placebo. These are the items rating them at 2 months after sessions, the rating of spiritual significance. This is percentage, saying it's in the top 5 most spiritually significant. Compared to placebo, you can see there's a big difference. It's personally meaningful, and it increases life satisfaction. With respect to their meditation practice itself, this shows that there were positive effects of psilocybin on non-sitting awareness practices. That would just be the sense of the opening to spirituality or attention to the present moment on a day-to-day basis. People reported greater flexibility in their meditation practice. They were more interested in exploring different forms of meditation, and they also reported increases in positive effects in their sitting meditation practice. So in long-term meditators, then, the point here is that despite decades of contemplative practice, psilocybin produced personally valued experiences, along with positive effects on meditation and daily awareness practices. And I would also underscore, though, that although these experiences are valued, none of these long-term meditators would have claimed that psilocybin is a substitute for meditation, because meditation really provides a much greater stability of day-to-day awareness. And one thing I also might comment on is the long-term meditators took to the psilocybin experience much more easily than did people without that experience of examining their own mind. Okay, one further study is a study that we did. It was a survey study, and we asked people, have you had a personal encounter with ultimate reality, God, or higher power? And more specifically to the second bullet here, what we were asking is, have you had an experience that someone might call ultimate reality, God of your understanding, higher power? Okay. And and we targeted two different groups in this study. Those who had an experience after consuming psilocybin mushrooms, and those who had had such an experience in absence of taking any other psychoactive drug. So what we're comparing here is groups of people who claim to have had this encounter experience, some of whom did so after receiving psilocybin or taking psilocybin, and some had this under other conditions, presumably spontaneously. Now, the two groups differ demographically. So you can see the psilocybin group on the left, the non-drug group on the right. They each has about, 1,100 in the psilocybin and about 800 in the non-drug group. But they're different. So the non-drug group tends to be older. More of them were female. They had more college education and higher income. So they're demographically different. Now, we asked them, what's the best descriptor of these four descriptors we gave them? What's the best descriptor that you have for that was encountered? And you can see that the non-drug group endorsed that they had encountered God or God of their understanding at a significantly higher rate, almost 50%, at a significantly higher rate than the psilocybin group. But conversely, and of interest here, if you look at ultimate reality, the psilocybin group were more likely to say that they encountered ultimate reality than the non-drug group. So far, what we have is demographic differences and differences in endorsement of these. And incidentally, in the data that I'll show you, as well as this data I'm showing you, we've corrected for those demographic differences statistically. But here's where it gets interesting. So they talk about having encountered something different. Some people feel it's God, others ultimate reality. But then we ask them, well, tell us about the qualitative attributions to that was encountered. And this is really striking to me. They're very similar. So what was encountered, whether it was with psilocybin or non-drug, whatever it was labeled, whether it was God or ultimate reality, it was intelligent, sacred, benevolent, eternal, and conscious. And in both cases, very low endorsement of malicious or negatively judgmental. Mystical experience scores were high in both groups, as was the attributions to the experience in both groups. So the enduring sense of spiritual significance and meaning and psychological insight. Finally, we looked at those people who identified as atheists before the encounter. And that was perhaps not surprisingly more common in the psilocybin group at 21% than the non-drug group, which was low. But the interesting piece here was that after the encounter, the majority of atheists from both groups no longer identified as atheists. And that was like 57% and 67% in the psilocybin and non-drug group, suggesting that these were in effect conversion experiences for the majority of atheists. It doesn't mean that they could have gone from atheist to agnostic. It doesn't mean that they're believers. It doesn't mean that they're going to endorse any theological understanding, but they no longer feel comfortable asserting that they're atheists, that they know with certainty that God or higher power or ultimate reality does not exist. So the overall conclusions here is that these data suggest that psilocybin occasion experiences of the divine may represent a model system for understanding non-drug, naturally occurring experiences, most often described as personal encounters with God. So I want to pull into the conclusions and implications here. So under the conditions of these studies, psilocybin occasions discrete experiences having marked similarities to classic mystical experiences. And these experiences are associated with enduring positive trait changes in spirituality and altruism. Now, the finding that psilocybin can occasion in most people studied, and that was, about 70%, that psilocybin can occasion in most people studied these mystical type experiences virtually identical to those that occur naturally, suggests that such experiences are biologically normal. That is, we're wired to have such experiences. And as a scientist, what's so exciting is that these experiences now are amenable to systematic prospective scientific study, because we can randomize people to different groups, and you need that prospective ability to compare conditions within people to really make use of empirical science as we know it. So it's a incredibly exciting time in research. There are so many different directions that can be taken. There are questions about biological psychiatry, about personality genetics, personal intention, how do they affect these experiences, and host of questions, really interesting questions about neuroscience and what structural and functional changes in the brain account for these. And there are behavioral science questions, what behaviors are changed. And of course, and the large bulk of attention has been given to therapeutic applications, which appear very promising. But for me, the last focus here on altruism and spirituality is the most important and consequential. These mystical type experiences are characterized, as I've said, with this sense of the interconnectedness of all people and things. We're all in this together. And there's a preciousness to these experiences, or sacredness. And as well as this sense that the experience is completely true. It's more real than everyday waking consciousness. And you bring those three things together, and it gives rise to this ethical impulse for mutual caretaking. It's really boils down to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I believe that unpacking that, understanding the determinants of that, and cultivating that within our society and other societies may ultimately be crucial to the very survival of our species. Thank you. Now, I have no audio on my end.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Thank you so much, Professor Griffiths. This was incredible. I am going to play your video now, and then we'll do the questions afterward. Okay?
Griffiths, and I'm very pleased to join you virtually to make some brief comments on what I consider to be a vital focus of future psychedelic research. So most research in the recent psychedelic renaissance has been on therapeutics, and this is understandable. But what I want to underscore is the importance of rigorous non-therapeutic research on what I broadly call spirituality and well-being in the service of human flourishing. So by way of background, I've been doing psychopharmacology research at Johns Hopkins for more than 50 years. About 25 years ago, I started a regular meditation practice that I continue today. Early experiences I had in meditation made me deeply curious about certain altered states of consciousness that felt profoundly meaningful to me. And it was that curiosity that prompted my interest in conducting our first psychedelic study, published in 2006, which was a rigorous non-therapeutic study in psychedelic naive participants that showed that a single dose of psilocybin occasioned mystical, transcendent, call it what you will, type experiences, similar to those and the study attributed substantial personal meaning and spiritual significance to these experiences, as well as enduring positive changes in moods, attitudes, and behavior. And remarkably, these effects occurred in most of the participants studied. Now, that study and others conducted over the past 20 years have shown that such experiences predict both positive therapeutic outcomes as well as these non-therapeutic outcomes. And germane to the point I want to make is those include positive trait changes in spirituality, well-being, and pro-social and ethical attitudes and behaviors. So what's going on? Well, that's why I'm here. We don't know. We don't know what's going on, but it seems to me that it's really interesting and important to find out. I think there's something about such experiences that relate intimately to the very nature of human consciousness, the nature of what it's like to be human. Reflect on the mysterious truth that if you turn your attention inward, with or without psychedelics, you can become aware that you're aware. And when you do so, an indisputable and profound inner knowing arises that we can only access individually. It's at the core of our humanity. We recognize that indeed we are all in this together, and it feels both precious and true, giving rise to this ethical impulse for mutual caretaking. I believe that exploration of this inner knowing through contemplative and other spiritual practices, as well as limited use of psychedelics, can result in a profound and uplifting shift in worldview, a waking up to a sense of freedom, peace, joy, and gratitude that many people simply find unimaginable. And the accompanying urge toward compassion and mutual caretaking strike me as foundational to the most basic ethical principle, that is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's for these reasons that I've come to believe that this line of non-therapeutic research is incredibly important and may ultimately prove to be crucial to the very survival of our species. So In my remaining minutes, I'd like to conclude by sharing some very personal observations that bear on this topic of spirituality and well-being. 10 months ago, I went in for a routine screening colonoscopy, believing myself to be very healthy, awakening from anesthesia with the news that I likely had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, which has been largely unresponsive to treatment. Now, ironically, the first psilocybin therapeutic study we conducted was treatment of depression and anxiety in patients who had a life-threatening cancer diagnosis. And in brief, that well-controlled study showed large, rapid, and enduring decreases in depression and anxiety after a single session with psilocybin, with mystical experience scores on treatment days predicting the magnitude of treatment effect. Over the course of that study, I spent many hours with these participants before, during, and after sessions. And I often wondered how I would deal with a similar situation. well, now I know. So where did I find myself after the diagnosis? Well, initially, frankly, in disbelief. It felt like a dream. It felt like it could not be true, a proverbial bad trip, if you will. But over just a few days, I quite quickly began to explore the range of psychological states that understandably emerge under such conditions. Depression, anxiety, fear, resentment, denial, combat, fighting the cancer, all of which seem both extremely uncomfortable and unwise. So given also my skeptical inclinations and scientific training, adoption of supernatural beliefs such as life after death is not a viable option. So for myself, what I came to recognize very quickly was what I had learned about the nature of mind from long-term meditation practice and from psychedelics became immediately applicable. The key insight is that we don't need to identify with thoughts or emotion as they arise, but instead we can turn with great interest to investigate the present moment, and we can cultivate gratitude for the astonishing mystery in which we find ourselves. In principle, we can do this at any moment that we choose to. So just reflect on the fact that we humans are these highly evolved sentient creatures. So we can see, hear, touch, taste. We've developed language and mathematics and the scientific method for discovering something about the nature of reality. But inexplicably, we have this capacity to be aware that we're aware. We're conscious. It's the only thing we know for sure, in fact. And we really don't even know it to be true of others. Yet we're deeply ignorant about what's going on. We don't understand consciousness. We're nowhere clear. It truly is a hard problem, maybe unsolvable. And we certainly don't know how this project started or where it's going. For me, the psychological off-ramp from potential emotional misery has been the cultivation of gratitude for the precious gift of life itself, of being conscious, awake to the mystery of this present moment. As unlikely as it may seem, my wife and I have experienced my diagnosis as a gift, a blessing, really. And I've often reflected what a tragedy it would have been to have been run over by a bus on my way to what I thought to be a mundane medical screening appointment that day. Because today, I am more awake, alive, and grateful than I've ever been before in my entire life. Now, that said, I cannot know if I will maintain this sense of gratitude and equanimity in face of what appears to be inevitable disease progression. But what I can do is lean into my strong intention to joyfully celebrate the preciousness of life. My heartfelt invitation to each of you is for you to join me in this celebration, to stay awake to this sense of profound and precious interconnectedness. We are all in this together. We really are. It's accompanied by the sense of benevolence, meaning, purpose that feels to be so completely true. It's astonishingly beautiful. So please join me in the celebration. Thank you.
Wow. That was wonderful. Now we're going to do a question and answer. We're going to turn the time over to Rick Langer and Steve Urquhart, and they're going to handle all the questions. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you. It says I can't start. Here, we're gonna come over to you. All right, we'll play musical chairs. Hello, Professor Griffiths.
Hello.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of echo here. But
You're muted right now.
I'm muted. I'm not muted on my end.
Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll get those straight. He's still host. Did you reclaim it?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
So he should be on.
Okay, try talking, Professor.
Okay, I'm talking. Are you able to hear me?
I don't think that's us. Shows he's on.
Professor, can you hear me?
Sorry.
What? Okay.
I was getting some feedback there. Oh, no longer. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
Yes. Yeah. You're coming
Look
through
at
loud and
this.
clear.
We have done it. Geniuses. Thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you for that video. My phone is absolutely blowing up with people saying how much they love you and appreciate who you are and what you have done. So I need to pass that along.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're richly fed that you are giving us this time. We have a few questions for you that have been submitted in advance by people listening, if that's okay. Okay, this first one feeds off your conclusion, which was astounding, that we are biologically hardwired for mystical experiences. The question is, do you believe that mystical states of consciousness are purely chemical, physical in nature, or might there also be a deeper physical reality that exists beyond our individual experience of reality?
It's a great question, and we simply don't know. We don't know the answer to that. Physics has come a long ways, but it's by no means closed the gap between quantum physics and more conventional physics. We don't understand consciousness at all. We don't even have. Well, we have theories about consciousness, but they're widely variant. So where I sit is that there's this deep mystery that we find ourselves in as these sentient creatures. It's astonishing, as I said. If you just think about it, that we're these highly evolved sentient creatures. We've developed evolutionarily, we've developed so much, but kind of peculiarly, we're aware that we're aware, and we don't understand that. But that's where I sit. That's to be celebrated. It's magnificent, and for me, what arises from that is just the gratitude for this deep privilege of being. So I don't have an answer. It's the short answer.
All right. A question, Roland. It says, I assume that having a bad experience with psychedelics is worth avoiding. Yet a well-known meditator has claimed that even a bad experience has positive effects. What do you consider a bad experience to be? How common are they? And can positive experiences emerge from a bad trip?
Yeah, so we, as I discussed in the presentation, we've done quite a bit of work in a big survey study on what we call challenging experiences, which might be synonymous for bad experiences. They're difficult experiences, and they can range from sheer terror to variations of that, just anxiety. One of the findings of that study was that these so-called challenging experiences or bad experiences were also rated as among the most meaningful and spiritually significant. And so we very much want to develop a situation that mitigates against the probability of those experiences. But it's very often that people have a psychedelic experiences that in which there are both challenging aspects to it, and then there's the emergence from those. And I think there's a deep teaching, a deep learning that can emerge out of psychedelic experiences along those lines. So when we prepare people and these are naive volunteers for a psilocybin session, we'll say, we certainly will not say that what you're looking for is a mystical experience. It's just, you just need to be open to whatever arises in consciousness and be curious about it. And it can take different forms, and some of those can be positive and some of those can be negative. And then we'll give an example. So for instance, if a difficult experience emerged in which you found yourself to be confronted with a demonic figure that was more real and more scary than anything you could imagine, because it's made by you for you, what you don't want to do is fight it. And you don't want to run from it. If you try to run from it, it's just going to chase you. And the recognition that we encourage people to bring in is that these are objects of mind. They're produced by you in mind, but you don't want to reify it as something other than that. And so the invitation is to be interested and curious. And if it's the monster, then instead of running or fighting, you want to approach it, even though the hair on the back of your head might be standing on end. And the guarantee is that it's going to change. I mean, and maybe initially it gets even more frightening, but then it's going to dissolve, and it might change into something beautiful or transcendent or lovely or grotesque, but it's going to change. And that's a deep teaching, and it really comes out of meditation practice as well, that these are just experiences arising in the field of consciousness. So what I would say is that difficult experiences are not to be avoided. Where we did find effects that seem to be correlated with long-term complaints about the nature of the experience and perhaps harmful experiences is if these were prolonged experiences, if people get stuck in this negative loop and they don't get out, and then there may be longer term consequences. But a lot of those kinds of things can be managed with the appropriate preparation and setting and compassionate sitters or guides.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That is such a beautiful way to phrase it, that demons and monsters we encounter in the mystic are made by us for us. I love that. Researchers necessarily use synthetic psilocybin rather than magic mushrooms, rather than organic mushrooms, because of its uniform replicability. Are there differences between the magic mushrooms and their synthetic counterpart?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there again, I have to say that we don't know, surprisingly. It turns out to be very difficult to do that experiment. And we've worked with Paul Stamets, who's done a lot of work, as many may know, in mushrooms and psilocybin mushrooms. And we're trying to acquire a set mushrooms, essentially, that meet FDA standards, which are incredibly rigorous in terms of being able to understand what you have and whether it's sustained over time. The assumption that we would generally have is that psilocybin is going to be very similar, if not identical, to mushrooms. Synthesized is going to be very similar, if not identical, to mushrooms. But we don't know that for certain. And there are other components of mushrooms that could be psychoactive in of themselves, or they could modulate the psychoactivity. So it's an open question.
When you talk about the future of humankind, each religious tradition rejects forms of spirituality that don't align with their own gods and sacred text. Is it possible to create a mode of spiritual dialogue that is context-free? And if so, what do you think it would look like? How might it be achieved?
Well, that's a great question. And indeed, the endowment research project that I'm trying to promote and have funded is aimed at that very thing. What we're trying to understand is what are the optimal conditions for producing these transcendent kinds of effects that lead to this sense of interconnection and understanding that we're all integrated into this together. And then from there, what we actually need to develop is the cultural institutions that can make use of those experiences. And so I think we need to invent new cultural institutions to do that. I mean, right now, many conventional religions have this exclusivity to them, and they pull in dogmatic theological beliefs. And my sense of this is that that's unnecessary. We can get down to the kind of the pure experience itself and how that can be then integrated. So we need to develop new cultural institutions, and ultimately we need to develop those worldwide, because we really need to come together as a species with a set of ethical understandings. And otherwise, my deepest concern is that we're going to destroy ourselves as a species. We have existential risks of great magnitude, be it nuclear weapons or bioweaponry or AI risk or climate change. And if those technologies get out in front of us in the wrong hands, we can destroy ourselves. So in some sense, I see us in a race to investigate these deeper experiences, but exactly how those come into form is it's outside of my wheelhouse in terms of understanding it. But I do have a sense it's possible, and it may be a multi-generational process in which cultural institutions co-evolve with the use of these compounds.
We have two more questions, and appropriately, they both deal with integration. I think this is my last time on camera, so again, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. You have changed the world. You have changed and improved my life, my wife's life, the life of so many people I love. There's no way to express gratitude for that other than a simple thank you.
Well, thanks for saying so, but I think I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So
Professor, let's not get into an argument here.
okay.
Okay, so you talked about this in part with meditation, and maybe that is your answer, but if so, maybe go a little deeper on that. How does a person integrate the spiritual experience one has during psychedelics into one's daily life?
Yeah, great question. So coming out of a meditation tradition, I'm biased. I think that there's something very powerful about meditation and learning about the nature of mind and how to let go of, how to navigate the experiences that arise in mind. And that's what I feel like I'm doing big time with this diagnosis. However, meditation is just one of, I think, numerous ways of cultivating this deeper sense of spirituality. And I think actually meditation is quite limited in some respects. So there's breath work, there are prayer practices, there are other contemplative practices. There are also embodied practices that are honed, to cultivate that sense. And those could be drumming practices or dancing practices, or other forms of movement. So I think there are many, many ways, and I think it's actually important to try to integrate them if you're going to really live a life of spirituality. I mean, so one big limitation of what we have done in the research world is we have focused only on introvertive psychedelic experiences. And, there are many people who will go, what you're putting people in with eye shades and headphones? They should be out in nature, and indeed, they're very powerful experiences that are also at their core mystical, but instead they can be extrovertive mystical experiences. There are different flavors of this. So there's so many ways to move in this, but my favorite would be meditation as a baseline.
Okay. Last question. Are the effects of a psychedelic experience long lasting, or does a person have to have refresher trips every so often to keep the benefit going?
Yeah, good question. So, so this is coming up in the some of the therapeutic trials in depression in particular, because there are people who will tend to have a therapeutic response and then become depressed, but there may be different things going on there, and the mechanisms underlying some of those antidepressant effects may be other than those that we were looking at in spirituality. But the answer about whether you really need to revisit these experiences, I think falls to this integration process. I mean, in principle, a single awakening experience should be enough, and whether it's occasioned by psychedelics or something else. But the human mind is a tricky thing, and so often we forget the importance, and unless we have cultivated a practice, a regular practice to remind ourselves and to lean into that, then we can move into different experiential territories, and we may need to be reminded. But in principle, my thought would be that it's not necessary.
Before we close for the night, I'd just like to offer two thoughts, Roland. First, a very deep bow of gratitude to you for your willingness to share your time with us. We know it's precious, and we are profoundly thankful for that.
Thank you.
Second, a request for our listeners. The new professorship that was established at Johns Hopkins, called the Roland R. Griffiths PhD Professorship Fund, is not yet fully funded. Its funding comes exclusively from private sources. The government does not fund this, and it's contributions from us. If you share Dr. Griffiths' vision, I'd ask you each to visit the website, griffithsfund.org, and make a donation in support of his vision and your vision. This could well be the most important charitable contribution you make all year. We thank you all for coming. Thank you, Roland. Good night.
Thank you, Rick.